Hello and welcome everyone. I am Smita Dave and I'm glad you're joining us for this episode. Today, we have a special guest and an exciting topic that I will think will resonate with tech professionals, business leaders, and our guest is Peter Klee, currently the Chief Service Architect at SAP, where he's worked for over 14 years. Peter has a rich career spanning leadership roles at Procter & Gamble and Gillette, as well as technical roles in software engineering. With more than 30 years in IT industry, he's developed deep expertise in enterprise architecture and ERP systems. He's a champion of modern design principles and object-oriented and model-driven design. Peter has led strategic transformation initiatives in large global organizations, bridging the gap between cutting-edge technology and real-world business needs. In our conversation today, we will explore the future of enterprise architecture and how SAP's strategy is evolving in an era of cloud-native systems and AI-driven innovation. Peter is a thoughtful visionary leader who's always looking ahead, and I can't wait to pick his brain on how emerging tech trends are reshaping the enterprise landscape. So stay tuned. I am excited to welcome Peter Klee for a relaxed, insightful discussion about what's next in enterprise technology. Welcome to the show, Peter. I'm excited to have you here today. You've been at the forefront of enterprise architecture for over 3 decades. From leading a global enterprise architecture teams at Procter & Gamble to now driving transformation initiatives at SAP. But let's be honest about the elephant in the room. We are hearing more and more about how enterprise architecture roles are being on the chopping block when budgets get tight. So I am curious, when you look at how EA has evolved since you've started your career, what's fundamentally changed about how we bridge business strategy and technology? And more importantly, how do we make the case that enterprise architecture is more essential now, not less?
Well, I think thank you first of all to invite me to this podcast, and you talk about many things already in your first question. So maybe first on the difference between the past and the present, right? So in the past, when I started in the first attempts, I think it was maybe more a new thing, right? So therefore, in some organization decided, let's build up a team, build up an organization, and enterprise architecture was forming at that time. It was not brand new. There are old frameworks like Sachman framework, which are very old and dated. But I think it was a bit of a first hype. If I compare to, say, how enterprise architecture should be run today, I think it is more integrated into a flow of the transformation. So it's not, okay, either you have enterprise architecture or you don't, right? So it's more, how can we make the use of enterprise architecture in transformations? So therefore, that for me is probably the biggest change. And therefore, by being engaged in the transformation, it's not that, okay, what is the role? What should we do with the enterprise architect? They should have a role being early on, still the bridge between business and IT. That promise has not changed from the past. But if you would avoid it these days, you would still be lost, right? So, and therefore, some of the promises still hold true. But what has changed from my perspective is successful practices of enterprise architecture are embedded into the transformation initiatives.
Awesome.
And now you had maybe more details on the questions. Remind me, what else did you want to know?
Sure. Awesome. Then another thing that caught my attention at Sapphire was this shift towards a modular transformation, right? Moving away from those massive, infrequent implementations to smaller, more frequent, value-driven changes. This feels like a fundamental shift in how we think about enterprise architecture. How do you design systems that can handle this kind of continuous transformation without breaking? And how do you actually make them more responsive Do you have a playbook? If so, what's your playbook for turning these complex environments into something that can actually move fast?
Yeah, I think that is a lot on the promise from SAP and maybe others, cloud ERP solutions or maybe software as a service solution, because on software as a service as a small package for travel or whatever, you would expect that innovations are coming in every day and you just see them and use them, right? In an
Right.
ERP system, we haven't had that in the past because it's on your premise. You probably have changed it, modified it, build your own bells and whistles around it, and therefore it got more and more complex, but not due to maybe the core design of the solution, but because of the long usage pattern. So I think the promise of a cloud ERP or business suite, because okay, it's not also a singular application, but even a larger business suite, is that it comes A, pre-integrated with other cloud solutions, and B, it comes clean. Whether it be now private cloud, where extensions can be done in a proper way, following our clean core approach, if I can explain what that means. And I think that means we're only using standardized APIs and interfaces, and with that, an upgrade can be still run through seamlessly. And that seamlessly upgrading more frequently without making a big upgrade projects for 6 months or longer. So that is a promise for either even the private cloud or more so for sure for the public cloud solutions, where I think it's not anyhow any longer in your premise when a new software version would come along. And then wherever you still need additional, let's say, custom specifics, you have in your specific extension platforms, but you would no longer modify or develop in the core of the solution, at least for certain extensions.
That makes sense. I also want to ask about what happened at Sapphire this 2025, right? SAP made some pretty bold claims about AI productivity gains. Something to the tune of 30%, up to 30%. That's a massive number.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who's seen a lot of technology promises of over years, how do you evaluate and also work with the clients for these kinds of claims?
Yeah, I think business AI, let's say already last year was in the forefront on our conferences, but what has changed in the last year, now it's on the forefront on any customer discussions. I had 2 customer meetings today, I think, and yes, there is still a strong pull from a customer side. So the potential of AI is tremendous. And I think it's in twofold. I think one is on the transactional processing. So daily tasks can be done more effectively, efficient. If it's in HR, kind of an offer letter created or certain text generation, but also deciding on business transactions. I think this is the operational use of AI. And there's another big, bold statement, AI is sitting on aggregated data. So this is where when you extract data from multiple sources, ideally in a standardized way, then you have more valuable data, and then you can have strategic AI on top of it. So this is where this promise of the business data cloud with SAP, with data products, etc., was promised at Sapphire, where I think data is now also by SAP in a standardized provided as centralized asset in the cloud, and then AI can sit with intelligent applications on top of that large set of data. So those are the two, from our architecture perspective, 2 elements of AI, either I think in the transactional systems themselves or on the strategic layer. And there's always another dimension. Is it out of the box AI, which we as software vendor or other software vendors are providing? Or is it AI you build for your own customer specific custom cases? And both needs to be possible in the new ecosystem as well.
And how do enterprise architects need to think about designing the systems based on the options you have given, Peter?
Well, for us, it's now when in the past, it was always the discussion best of breed or best of suite. So if you continue to select arbitrary solutions and then hope that the data of that one easily fits together and can serve a common AI, it's a little bit more difficult. So our architecture recommendation is maybe more, and you can now argue, well, you are from SAP, so that's why you argue this way. But I think if you have a business suite of solutions fitting well together, then also the data is already pre-integrated and fits well, and therefore less effort needs to be spent on integration and also then the data layer and the AI layer on top. So that is the focus on integration, which was always a cost driver in the past.
Right.
This is, I think, where we should still focus on, not only in the target architecture, but also in the transition, how to get there, that I don't get lost in this complexity. So simplifying the landscape, rationalizing applications is a good practice, was a good practice, has done, and is still even also supporting this new architecture as well.
I love that. And I am intrigued by this term that or concept SAP has introduced, AI Flywheel, right? Which is one of the things you're talking about, where applications generate data that fuels AI, which then enhances the applications. Sounds really elegant in theory, but based on your conversation with the clients, can you give us a few ideas or how do you actually think this works in practice?
To be very honest, okay, I'm an enterprise architect. I'm not the AI specialist. Okay,
Yeah.
that flywheel is also a known concept, and I alluded about it. That we say, okay, well, I have intelligent apps on top. If you have intelligent apps on top, they should not only give recommendations in isolation. So the use of data marts and in the past for data warehouses, or now intelligent applications on top of this one. The wheel comes when you use the outcomes to steer your operations. So you have that feedback loop that I think insights are not only insights on dashboards and used in boardrooms, but they are used to optimize your, let's say, your next round of planning. So if you plan the inventories and you see a high demand or an external event which will boost the demand of batteries or whatever you recommend, then you should use it in your next operational planning round. So to restock or reship inventories from one continent to the other because there was an earthquake or something of that kind. So I think in some of these insights are not insights in the operational data, but rather on these strategic data.
External.
And then the AI on top of that one, if they recognize these patterns and then feed it back into the operational planning, that is what, for me, that feedback loop or that flywheel, as you described it, are describing best.
And when you're designing an enterprise architecture, how do you think through this? How do you actually build for this continuous intelligence cycle as you were articulating?
I think use cases for AI are, again, I think very customer specific. Some see a lot of inefficiencies in their operational. So it's more, let's say, cutting out of their productivity losses by totally manual work. And others really seek for this intelligence, right? So that I think they want to get better in planning and strategic decisions. And some have ideas which are not as easy to produce because not all things, all customer specific ideas are already pre-implemented in standard solutions. So that is then where we or data scientists could work on specific customer specific use cases, and then they need to design their own solution. And they need to say, do I need additional data products in my data layer, or where can I feed my intelligence I need for a specific use case with the data I need? Or I start with use cases which are already pre-thought by others, and then I just want to be as good as my competitor, but I don't want to be better, right? So this is, again, likewise, when we start analyzing the business architecture with business capabilities, we also now try to identify the potential of AI in these business capabilities. Or even then assessing where is my maturity not good enough and where I want to reach a better maturity of a business capability. And it could be that AI is the solution to close this gap. It could be that the pure maturity was because you have fragmented, outdated legacy solutions, and then just moving to a standard ERP system is already the next big step forward. So I think that's, again, where's my starting point from a company perspective, and what is my strategic goal. But also be caution, don't put AI on everything, rather see, okay, where's the most value? And again, I think value could be in productivity or strategic decisions.
And also make sure you bring human into the center.
Yeah, Yes, for sure.
Right. Awesome. Another thing that interestingly caught my attention at Sapphire was the shift towards a modular transformation. Right. We lived in implementations which used to last 5, 7, 10 years, but organizations are no longer interested to wait that amount of time to realize the benefits. So they want to move away from infrequent implementations to they want to bring value in and they want to realize value on. And this feels like a or does it actually feel like a fundamental shift on how we think from an enterprise architect perspective? And are you having conversations with clients in that regards? And how are you as an enterprise architect trying to build and design this continuous transformation that hopefully will generate ROI earlier for the C-suite leaders?
Yeah, I think the speed of implementation was always a topic, right? In the past, it was this huge waterfall program built with blueprints of 500 pages in a document or in a book, right? So I can remember those days.
Yes.
And okay, this time is gone since quite a while. So there are always even agile sprints built in so that I think in the fit to standard process, I think people ideally should already see what they will get and then design the delta. So I think the whole design process on the journey to implement a target solution has shifted since many years already, I think. So this whole blueprint thing of a static blueprint has long disappeared. But another discussion I always have with my clients as well, okay, into how many small pieces do you chunk your transformation? Okay, do you do a rollout country by country or even factory by factory, side by side, et cetera, et cetera? Because if you do that and then it can take quite a while, let's say in a greenfield implementation, to come to transform from a start into a target state in only 5 years. So I think I still sometimes see roadmaps 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And then I would argue, well, why do you want to chunk this into so many small things? You said, okay, maybe continuous innovation once you are live with your entire business is a good thing, but a continuous rollout in which you over a course of 6 or 7 years put entity by entity onto a new ERP system is not what we would recommend, because it will bring disruption with every go live, and with that it brings risk. So where companies sometimes think I'm de-risking by putting things into a longer implementation period, our perspective is rather, okay, think more Big Bang, right? So Big Bang has a negative connotation,
Yes.
but make it as big as possible at least, right? So because you de-risk with a single transformation, which you can secure better by good testing, try cutovers, whatever, I think the instruments are there and known. I think you de-risk much more by going in Big Bang. And some customers even see, I want to transform my entire system, maybe in a brownfield conversion, plus a certain surrounding system at the same time. I say, super, we are on the same line. And then we need to see, yes, there are risks, but those can be mitigated as well. And then I think at least the big transformation might be not that long of a project. And then, yes, if there's still work to be done, ideally with more of a clean core, we are back to that discussion we had earlier where we said, okay, well, maybe now we can start this continuous innovation cycle where ideally all the different entities on a big ERP system can consume these new innovations at the same time. And you do not again go back to country by country by country rollout, because that again takes time, and losing time is also losing value.
It's interesting that you're trying to bring the whole Big Bang back into the picture, right?
Well, not always and not for everything, and not unreflected.
Love it.
I think that just by some people telling me no way that we can do it, and then I look at what you are doing here, and then proving them how many steps and how many interim rewiring of interfaces they need to control. And then when I even ask, where do you manage your integration oversight that
or interim interfaces?
I have no clue. Okay, they see that as one point where you don't see the risk. You have only a sense and a feeling of a risk. And that's where I think we need to be more active in providing this transparency. And hence, that's why we also have architecture tools in which we try to make the steps on the transformation more tangible and visible.
Let's assume we will talk more about Big Bang and we can actually make it work with thorough testing, with with making sure the data is there overall, but the change is always a bigger impact too, right? And I know in your perspective with Big Bang, you're saying let's go back to standardization, but especially at larger organizations, it's a lot more difficult because they have a lot of technical debt. So maybe what I will do is we will pivot our conversation into change management. So in your example where you're suggesting for your organization, if you're able to fit to standard and if that is a use case for business of Big Bang, how would you actually enable change impact? That being, I'm pretty sure a whole bunch of people will actually be listening to it and saying, nah, Big Bang will never work, Peter.
And I think I would also not say Big Bang works everywhere, right? So
Perfect.
I think so. That's again, I think that's the analysis of an enterprise architect. When you get into a situation, you know, okay, what is your starting point? If your starting point is a fragmented landscape with 5 or 6 different ERPs of different acquisitions, no way that you can take these 7 entities in a big bang into the new future nirvana. So then I would clearly say, well, first of all, can we identify one unit in the current universe which is possibly a good footprint for the others? If that is the case, maybe we start with that one and take this one over and then get the others on board. But often, if it is that fragmented, then even a greenfield new implementation is right. And the greenfield new implementation for a very fragmented business, which runs different processes in different regions of the world, is also not Big Bang. So don't get me wrong. Maybe I overemphasize this
Perfect.
in these cases, it is not that way, right? So you rather say in the same way, okay, start with a meaningful cluster of countries or entities and only also try to define your rollout strategy by a good set of criteria. And therefore, rollout strategy is also one practice the enterprise architect helps on.
Do you also see scenarios where, as organizations are looking at it with AI into the picture, you see a little more modular transformations at a use case level that at least kind of enables CFOs and CIOs to take a step in the right direction?
Absolutely. And I think this is also a question on prioritization, right? If you are confronted that, okay, your large transformation will take 6 years because you are so complex. You are the
Right.
biggest car manufacturer on the world and have so many different systems, etc. Then you cannot say, okay, well, wait 8 years and then I come with my first AI use case, right? So there you need to find, okay, how can I embed these things early on? Ideally, you already design it that it is reusable in the new world, because if you don't, then you need to redesign, but you at least make your first experiences. And for sure, I think with AI being on the forefront from everyone, why not even starting this in old ERP systems, right? The only thing is, okay, some of the newer platforms or the newer releases come with more things out of the box. And therefore, the question is, okay, how much do I have the immediate need for AI or the immediate need for some custom innovation? And then I continue in the old-fashioned way to innovate in small steps, incremental in my old environment, before I might need to do the large step. But also be clear, so they are already on the future platform. And then for them, it should be easier. Well, if they still are afraid on upgrades, then they need to look in their extension strategy. They need to clean up their systems so they are no longer afraid, so that they can get the regular upgrades, they can get the innovations as they come out of the software vendor.
Awesome. But I also don't want to leave the 42+% of the customers who are on ECC out there. They also potentially will have the opportunity to leverage AI and start bringing into their edge, for the lack of a better word, as they're looking through from that perspective, right?
Right, and careful, right? So first of all, I'm not a product person and not a salesperson, but I think there are certain innovations which need the connection to the BTP, the business transformation platform.
Right.
And certain software elements are also bound to a cloud contract.
I hear you.
RISE cloud contract. So certain elements and certain software components are no longer used under the old ECC ERP licensing. They're only possible in the new world. So therefore,
That's a
careful to look at.
That's a BTP restriction, though, because if I were to think of speaking of AI capabilities, I also am seeing some pretty significant partnerships at Sapphire, right? NVIDIA, Google, Perplexity, Palantir. Um, there, obviously, I know we talked about the whole AI foundation with Joule Studio for Development and BTP. That means that maybe based on all the SAP alliances, AI is not just limited to Joule and BTP, but people can also play with all these multi-vendor AI capabilities. But that also means that it's a lot of work for enterprise structure. So how do you think about integrating all of this from an enterprise architecture perspective?
Well, I think if companies decide to do so, okay, get me best of breed AI solutions, and I have 10. To a certain extent, if we even look inside SAP, so I'm in the customer service and support area, so even there I know at least 7, 8 groups playing around with different AI libraries, and not all with our own Joule platform yet. So I think it's still in early adopter stages. So there is some of these R&D. Everyone is trying out everything. I think that's always even the discussion between innovations and enterprise architecture, right? So the innovators, they say, I can't accept any restrictions. Give me any kind of technology available. I need to try out. I need to fail often. I need to fail fast to then find the real nuggets which bring me the next step further. And I think nothing wrong with that one. The enterprise architect on the other side needs to be careful. If you try out 50 things and bring me 10 new technologies every month, how can we ever scale, integrate, and manage this complexity? You might have a nice superior feature implemented, but the overall landscape maintainability might decrease. Therefore, this is a bit of a balance to be taken. And therefore, okay, if you now say, okay, let's go and use the AI of the hyperscalers, sure, you can do this, but then you probably need to build custom specific interface to get the data into their ecosystem, and may need to do your own data harmonization, etc., etc. So there is possibly some extra effort. Many customers have already invested a lot into their hyperscaler ecosystem, and they might tend to, okay, I want to hold on that one. I'm not interested in what you SAP guys now are doing. You are late to the show. Yes, we are a little late to the show, maybe, but I think we bring things out of the box. So in you still want to, okay, I build always my custom little Lego things. I want to play this way. And here we might have nicer and bigger things in the future. So it is then a balance to also look, okay, what could be now used from the SAP ecosystem out of the box through Joule and other areas, versus, okay, do I need to still hold on what I've done with AWS or Azure or whomever, Google, to name the three? That's the decision.
Awesome. Yeah. I think I'll include a little bit of shameless plugging, because we are also seeing the same thing, right?
Okay.
Customers are saying, hey, sometimes SAP is a bit late to the table. So we were actually looking at use cases of how do we enable a platform that would leverage the customer overall architecture, and we leverage that architecture to build it. And that's what Sarah's all for, because it's difference between buying 10 cars and trying to drive one, or leveraging what cars do they have so that we rent a driver out to give the right driver. So I hear you when you're saying this actually becomes a lot more complex. Another interesting thing I've noticed is SAP actually announced role-based certification for enterprise architecture, which is interesting timing, because it suggests that SAP themselves are seeing enterprise architecture is becoming more specialized around their technology stack. Do you think this reflects a broader trend where enterprise architects need to become more platform specific, or is it more part of SAP trying to build their own ecosystem?
No, I think if you go through the certification, I think it is not about, okay, please tell me whatever the 5 services under the HANA cloud platform or whatever. So it is not about training the specifics of the SAP product suite, right? And The reason why I think we focus a lot on enterprise architecture from our area as part of the transformation practice is because, yes, we know that the customers do not only have SAP, and we want to help them to bring together the enterprise architecture they have outside of SAP ecosystem with the new SAP ecosystem.
Love it.
What is
Love it.
specific also to our enterprise architecture framework is we have one dimension called the reference content. So whenever now our engineering department develops new solutions, they define already a reference architecture. So when I'm in services, for example, get to a customer and talk about some procurement processes with bidding and auctioning and whatnot, etc. I have a reference capability model. I have the process models. I have sometimes reference industry-specific process variants, and I can talk this. I can have a discussion with the customer, enterprise architect, ideally say, hey, we support these different process variants. They would result in these solutions. And therefore, it is other than the old frameworks which have had any content. So I think for sure, it's then the use of that reference content that you say, okay, I only have SAP in these functional areas or in these processes, and then customer specific, we need to merge it with non-SAP stuff. Our focus on enterprise architecture wouldn't say, okay, you should not, let's say, document non-SAP stuff with our methodology. The methodology, as well as SAP LeanIX, the acquisition of the tooling side, is open to everything, right? So as LeanIX was more or less a market leader already before SAP acquired LeanIX, but we haven't had anything good in our area. But we now believe that enterprise architecture is a valuable practice in the transformation management end-to-end. And therefore, I think our focus now on the certification and the entire framework is highlighting not only the methodology, but also the reference content, the tooling. Also, we help the practice to establish the practice or maturing the practice of enterprise architecture in customers. And we also for sure have services. We as a service company within SAP also try to help customers on that regard.
Awesome. Then speaking of frameworks, I love the fact that you bought the enterprise architecture framework, which is SAP's own. What if you have most of your customers might probably be using TOGAF or other industry standards, right? Then how do you navigate that?
No, I think TOGAF and ours are, I wouldn't say identical, but in the core, the ADM cycle, with all the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever, we have that as well. So I think you'll find in our training enablement, we also can depict our methodology and framework according exactly the same thing. But if you go through a TOGAF certification, a deep certification, I would say you can get lost because it's so complex, has so many facets. And it's also a lot more for system architecture, right? So when we follow the approach of enterprise architecture is not only, but primarily focusing composing standard software, right? Or different software components together. The traditional TOGAF environment sometimes even reaches down to system architecture. So I think it's much more generic and can serve so many different things. And we come a little bit more with a lightweight and an opinionated way, which helps perfectly in the transformations we have ahead of us. And for sure, we also now provide reference architectures for AI BTP cases or for other, let's say, clean core extensibility use cases. Those reference architectures, how to use BTP, are now also available, for example, in a tooling like LeanIX, and show me the reference architecture. And then with one click, you have it in the tool and you can design after that. So long story short, I think we are not that different than TOGAF. We are rather more simple, but we are more opinionated in the way that we come with content from SAP, which makes SAP-centric companies easier to adopt. But I still hope that enterprise architects who are not in the SAP ecosystems have a look, because we don't constrain them in any kind or any form.
Okay, then let's shift our gears back to AI, right? Because that's the hottest topic. And I want to stay focused on what come out of Sapphire because we just came out of Sapphire. And SAP is talking about Joule having over 1,600 built-in skills, moving towards autonomous agents for specific domains like finance and supply chain. And, this feels like a major shift from an AI as a tool to AI almost like as a actor in business process. Right? So, with your enterprise architect framework, how do enterprise architects need to rethink system design when AI isn't just analyzing data, but also is taking actions and taking it from there?
Yeah. So I think your observation is perfectly right. And I see this even beyond the scope of ERP systems. Even we for
Right.
ourselves think, okay, how could we use AI for our enterprise architecture work? And we think in those agentic models in the same way. Not the saying that there will be an AI who will be your enterprise architects next year, but I think we can, for certain areas, we can also use AI on, and definitely also in enterprise architecture. But I think the awareness and the design, I think one big step is that Linux has announced also on Sapphire that they become a kind of a repository for all the AI agents. So I think they can crawl the different source systems and act as an inventory. Okay, what are the agents? So that we as enterprise architects have an overview and oversight and can see, okay, here in these function areas, you already have these AIs. And now another business unit comes, okay, and wants to do a redundant AI effort in that area, and then maybe, well, what are the synergies? Can we stop that, or can we focus on other areas? So the transparency as one of the focus of enterprise architecture now needs to also include the AI layer, not down to maybe every single data item or whatnot, but I think on an aggregated level that I see, okay, where am I looking behind, or where am I leveraging AI in the sufficient capacity?
So let me talk about a little more about, with AI and everything, we've always known data governance is extremely important, right? Unfortunately, while data governance is essential, it never gotten that level of importance. A lot of organizations I went through, they say, well, they give me all the responsibility, but not the authority to execute, right? You would see governance organizations, governance labs, but more than ever now, data has become more crucial. And I just want to ask you about something that literally feels like deja vu to me in that aspect, right? We've been through this multiple cycle before with model-driven architecture in the early 2000s. Everyone was excited about generating code from high-level models, but it never delivered on processes, on that promise, right? And now when we are looking at domain-driven design, making a command, are we repeating the old mistakes, or are you actually seeing something different where organizations are taking it a lot more seriously?
Well, I think it's there is a lot of silo. When things failed, I think it was failing because there was a silo thinking. So it was either everything on data, then there was, okay, a chief data officer, everything was data, and don't talk about process, don't talk about architecture. Or then you have still in a lot of companies, you have a strong process focus. I talk to some people saying, why do you need enterprise architecture? We always start with process first, process, and then they ignore everything else. And then I think because of this hype or overhype on these things, either then purely process focus or purely data focus would neither one or the other is right. So for me, it's recognizing the value of data, no doubt that this is wrong. But if you don't have nice processes running on top of the data or you have a fragmented application landscape, you will also fail. And that is for me still then the promise of enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is not the governor of all data and all process, but I think enterprise architecture should have enough insight into the data domains and maybe the main entities and make clear how they will flow through the enterprise. And then also what is then going to the data layer and what insights are being done there. But it probably doesn't go to every data field and every detailed documentation on a data lake and whatnot. There still specialized teams should come in. But if the teams do not collaborate, if I have silo thinking in process, silo thinking in data, it won't work. And back to you, when we first talked about what was in the past, there was also silo thinking on enterprise architecture, which is fundamentally wrong, because otherwise we would say, okay, I am the ivory tower enterprise architect and I'm the dictator in the company, deciding everything. This is fundamentally wrong as well, for sure. That's why the
True.
enterprise architect needs to provide services to the other, let's say, domains, or work with them, that we find the right level of depth where we see data in the context of the processes, or where we say data in the context of the solutions. And then we can still have, if you wish, we can have still these CRUD matrices, create, read, update. Some of these things we had done in the past can still be valuable for certain purposes, but decide on what is the right level of alignment and governance which can be sustained. Because if you go too deep, then after you are done with your process model, you need to restart again because they are no longer valid. And then you are in a constant documenting area, and that is not valuable. Ideally, for sure, a lot more can be done these days with auto discovery, of process discovery, data discovery, etc., etc. That is another good asset to the mix that I think ideally can bootstrap a lot of the documentation out of what you already have out there.
So integration with processes and data and continuously iterating on that is the key. Awesome.
Yes.
What do you think about cloud native architecture, right? I see SAP talking about microservices and containers, but ERP systems have traditionally been massive monolithics, right? And how do you break apart something like SAP without breaking the business processes that demand on it? Or what's another way to think about it?
First of all, every technology has a hype cycle, and we know it, right? So everything needs to be web service, and then people created web service like crazy. And in the end, if you have a very complex network of web services, either your business demands it because you need them in that way, but often that slowed down innovation as well, because out of the sudden, I cannot change my web services because I have so many consumers. I don't know where these web services are called from the enterprise. So you're stuck to a certain architecture. So
Right.
if you listen around, some people say, oh, there's again also the praise of the new monolith, right? So only put things in web services in that native modular way when there is a need to do so. When you need to exchange it, or when you have definitely different consumers, you know it and you design it in that way. Then design them in a coarse, granular way and not in a totally fragmented way, because then out of the sudden the overkill, there's an overkill if you do it too much. And
so it's all about balancing.
Our S/4HANA or ERP suite is not built on web services internally, right? So there is still a heritage from an old design, but I think more modern solutions, or some of the smaller solutions, are being redesigned in a cloud native way on top of BTP, and then they follow these areas, and then you have all the mechanisms to access this. But even the cloud SDK from SAP, where you can use Java, I think Python and Java,
Right.
you can use the OData framework, and then you can navigate nicely through a chain of objects, and that feels already very modern, even though you still access sales orders, and on the database they are still in these old VBAC, VBAP, whatever tables all of us know who had developed, at least in the late 2000s. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's get personal for a moment.
Okay.
You've been doing this for almost for over 30 years. You've seen client server, SOA, cloud, and now AI. When you look back, what's one thing that you believe has not changed? And what's been your North Star through all these technology waves?
It's interesting. I think to a certain extent, the database, right? So the database was there. Okay, well, in the beginning was in university, I already worked with an Oracle database with PLSQL interfaces,
Right.
C programming, right? So that was my first attempt. So you could argue DBase on and so certain things, and so data is always there, right? So that was there, and to a certain extent, even the recovery and the persistency of that things is there. Is this my North Star? So is that exciting? So I would argue it's interesting that now when you see how now on top of the database schema of an ERP system like S/4HANA, if you look into the details, you would even still remember R2 was very similar. But I think with the cloud data services on top, so with the with the different virtual layers on top, you can consume it in a totally different manner. Or now with our business data products, I think so in the business data cloud with the data products, you also expose the data which is coming from a very traditional relational data schema now in a very modern cloud native fashion. So this is for me fascinating that certain elements, which is very old fashioned, are still
Right.
the foundation of something very modern.
I hear you.
And to
Awesome.
that extent, I would argue when we now talked so much about AI, when I studied computer science, we still had also something like expert systems. So that was the very early systems of AI. It was rule-based systems, neural networks, and whatnot. Prolog as a programming language, it didn't scale in that way. And so I think, therefore, it was an early hype. It failed a lot, was silent for a very long time. And now I'm happy to see this one again because it interested me as well already at that early in the 80s, but it didn't succeed at that early time. So now it's back and I'm happy with that one as well.
I love it. So I bet you had some battles along the way, right?
Oh, yes.
Can you tell me how are you trying to help the organizations now? Because I am pretty sure there is still some resistance in some of the advice you're offering for, or maybe from business, maybe from technical team. Love some of your perspectives you have in there.
First of all, the question is when we talk to customers, do we talk to both sides or do we only talk to already only one opinionated sides?
Right.
We at SAP sometimes talk only to IT and then say, yeah, no, don't care about the business. We handle that. But then you ask, how do you interact with the business? Yeah, we don't do that much. We know already what they think. And then you wonder, okay, or you know why the business might be unhappy with IT because there is no dialogue. So therefore, our approach to enterprise architecture is that we say, okay, well, we are not McKinsey. We don't want to build your strategy. Just please explain me your strategy. I think, or let's see, is it aligned with what you are doing? So we really try to follow that layered approach to enterprise architecture. And then you see which company is already mature enough to take that discussion. And often they say, no, we only want to have that interface fixed by you with enterprise architecture. Oh, but this is not enterprise architecture. I can fix a bug or a solution, but that is not, I think, what we stand in for, trying to get advice in a holistic way, right? So therefore, we need to understand ideally capability, strategy, how they link, and then define, okay, where is change needed the most? And not just, okay, if they complain about, okay, only interface ABC, then yes, they can do it, but they don't need us as advisors. So I think that one is the biggest discussion to convince the customers to get on the journey together with us. Once they've done it, they say, oh, we never looked at landscapes like ours, how you did it. Now we understand why this is important. And then I hope that they also take on enterprise architecture as a practice into their business. And we can also help them on that one. So that is not always easy because every IT professional, they know their SAP systems since ever. They know them much
Right.
better than we do. And I would never argue that I know the systems better than the customer systems, but we know how to approach it, right? So how to use our practice on enterprise architecture. And once they understand that we are really helping them and we are not dictating them, we are not sales, I'm not saying, you need to do this with SAP IBP and you can't use this one. That's not my role. My role is only, okay, well, SAP reference is there, you don't have this, okay, then let's see how you can live with the consequences. And then sometimes I might say, okay, yeah, but that doesn't feel like, okay, how would an SAP solution look like? And yes, sometimes that is where I said we also have this reference architecture, and then we can show them how it would be if they would use SAP.
I know you're also passionate about expanding the enterprise architect community and bringing in the next generation of architects, right? So when young technologies ask you how to move from being a great architect to You being a strategic leader, what do you tell them? Is it more about developing business acumen or staying technical sharp, or basically a combination of both?
I think both is needed, right? I have seen a lot of experienced business architect in SAP who, in discussion with customers, when the discussion came on, let's say, AI or BTP, they say, no, we are business architects. We are not talking this with them. And then you see the customer, really? then, okay, in the quotes, okay, they're writing an email. Could you get me another consultant into the project? So you need to have both, right? So I think maybe strategic Boston Consulting Group, whatever, can do one layer only on McKinsey. They don't want to go to details of consulting, but I think you need both, and you need to understand how deep you need to know this. So we
Absolutely.
have problems in putting some of our technical colleagues who are very good in their solutions in finance, for example, then hey, come with me on to a customer and say, but I only know my month-end closing process. I don't know the other fun on how the business process is run. So when I go to customers, I use the capability model and I do the interview with large customers. I did it with many functions from R&D to supply chain to finance to sales. I do it myself. I'm not the expert in everything to the deep level, but as I have a reference model to use, and I have a sense on how business runs, and yes, this comes with
Absolutely.
experience, then you can use it, and then you will be accepted by the customers. They will tell you what they dislike, right? So I ask them for the deficiencies, and I know where to ask, but the answers come from the customers. And then I note it down, and then you can work on this to improve it. And that is true for both. It's true for the business side, as well as the technology side, right? So for sure, technology performance optimizer can look at logs and very more fact-based things. But even technologies, I think the stacks are also so complex. And so therefore, you need to also have discussions and see where to focus on.
So, Peter, you walk through a lot of customers through SAP's Transformation Hub, right? Or at least just from an SAP perspective, because you're one of the leaders. And when you see architecture programs that really succeed versus the ones that struggle, what are the few things that makes a difference, and what are the common patterns you see?
Yeah, I worked with a couple architecture practice where I say, okay, they did a better job than the job I did when I was even at P&G. So I think I've seen good practices, and it was often that there had been a couple masterminds who really then designed it. So it often that you have very strong leaders, opinionated leaders, and they know why they are doing it, right? So they're not doing it for a purpose or for being an enterprise architect. They know because, okay, either in one case, it was a very complex business and he had a very clear vision how to divide and conquer the architecture to serve this complex business. The other person was in the consulting area, so they knew that they had a totally fragmented platform and cost was a big topic, right? So therefore, they designed the architecture effort to have a cost dimension next to everything. So they had even projections over the next years, and they do a change in the architecture. They could predict how the positive impact or negative impact was on an architecture decision. So those had been two practices built by thought leaders around the needs of their respective companies, and they did it in a brilliant way. So they had also good reputation in their respective companies, not being the isolated ivory tower architect no one would talk to. So they had been asked by CIO, C-levels, etc. So their voice was heard. They are not the decision makers per se, but they could present their recommendations in a very professional way, which is sometimes beyond standard artifacts we would train in our frameworks, because sometimes you might need to go the extra mile and then extend the framework to cover, in that case, the one case it was the cost, and the other one was a kind of a layered architecture fitting this complexity of that customer. I said, okay, well, this is superior. I love it. And then I came in, and first I said, okay, I can't help you because you're doing it so well. So I'm saying that, right? So in the end, they could still use some of our reference experience, et cetera, et cetera. So we work nicely together. But for sure, this is for me beauty. If I see, okay, I go into customers and I can still learn from those cases, right? So it's not that I cannot learn as well in these cases. And
I
then,
love
yeah,
I love it. You basically said it's opinionated leaders who can influence, who are
yes,
not working in silos, but are actually reaching out in a collaborative
huh,
manner to listen and to influence, knowing that that is what the organization needs.
yeah. And sometimes one of those two from very praised people said, okay, Peter, we need you because you as a software provider, you can now talk to our management to convince them on what I have designed, right? So that was also then, okay. And then it's okay, well, yes, I believe in what you have done, and we optimized it left and right a bit. And then we used also sometimes the power of, let's say, some partners or C-level relationships that sometimes also, even though they had been talking, but maybe not convincing enough to get it really done. Because some of these transformations are fundamental and a lot needs to be changed. And therefore, change, where there's a demand for change, there's also a resistance to that change, right? So it's always there.
Awesome. So let me share something that I've been seeing, right? I've always been like I grew up in the weeds of SAP, turned into a business transformation expert, and later on moved on to or like, through the last decade, pulled in AI and all when it was actually machine learning, not even AI. I
Yeah.
was part of the entire journey. But as we are looking through future gazing and this year it's 2025. Where do you think enterprise architecture is actually headed? Are we becoming more business focused or more technically specialized? Because based on the journey I've been having the last couple of years, I feel like we're being pulled in both directions. And I would love to understand your perspectives.
But it's good that we are pulled in one direction, because it's meaning we are not okay. Just if we pull you just in one direction, then you lose the promise of what we try to achieve, right? So I think the trick is, and I also wrote it in the book we wrote on enterprise architecture, so also to see where you need to say stop, right? So you need to say, well, I'm in the enterprise architecture. I help you in the early phases. I draw the larger picture, and then I need to delegate to other teams doing maybe the more detailed design. And then once they're done and ready, they need to come back and see, does this fit to the overall architecture? So staying on and being accepted to stay on a certain abstract level. Sometimes I'm getting called into customers by enterprise architecture teams, and sometimes you sense, okay, they don't accept you, right? So then they prop you. Oh, we have the bad shop, and here this and this went wrong. What is your opinion on that one, right? So they try to prop you on arbitrary current day-to-day issues they might have. And well, that's not my typical role as an enterprise architect. And they say, this is not typically how I would approach it, but okay, then asking questions in the other direction in a friendly way, right? So you need to find that collaboration mode to then get into the next level. Yeah. So I think enterprise architecture, as I said, I think it needs to be integrated in the other practices, but it should stay ideally on top. That is the promise. And therefore, I would never say, oh, only do processes and enterprise architecture is no longer needed. We need to see if I'm also not a futurist, so I cannot predict. Will AI also change entirely the way on how we work? Will AI change fundamentally? I think, yes, there are these posts out there. AI will make ERPs not needed any longer because the agentic frameworks can configure dynamically and will replace ERP systems. I don't believe in that, right? So therefore,
Me neither.
system for so long, and I doubt that hallucinations would not come into play, or that in the end that much complexity would need to go into this agentic collaboration, that you just, let's say, move the logic from an ERP system into a very complex agent system, which you can maybe do for a very small use case, let's say travel booking, perfect use case for these ones, but not for managing an enterprise.
I hear you, and I am inclined to agree with you for now based on what we are seeing. And you're absolutely right. It takes a lot of context generation to reduce halogens in, the hallucinations too. So I do agree with you. But beyond the obvious stuff like AI, cloud, what's on your radar that you believe that ARC might not be paying attention to yet? Do you think there's anything like that? Any technologies or trends that will think blindside us in the next few years? Or do we believe that with the whole people, process, data, and technology, enterprise architects are looking at it all?
Now, okay, you could argue, is quantum computing the next big thing? Some people say that one, right? So to check this in arbitrary. Actually, I'm not on that camp. Could be that we get into new classes of computing which allow us totally different things, and then we need to see and adopt. But I think being adaptable or being open to change, I think that should be a practice of enterprise architects, right? So therefore, I would love that things would change, because if nothing would change, then it might get boring, right? So, and I think when I would look back now, I think, well, we have talked to data warehouses, data lakes, or data
Yeah.
mart at that time already, 20, 30 years ago. Yes, that was not too new at that time, or business warehouse or things. So certain elements have been already grounded there, they're still around, right? So is the speed now increasing? Yes, around AI, the speed is phenomenal. But I think in the end, is there a limit, or will it totally change the game? I would say hopefully yes, because then we can redefine architecture and then it's not getting boring. Do I believe it will change everything? Not yet 100%.
Perfect. Final question. This is pure speculation. If we are having this conversation again in 2030, what do you think we will be saying about the impact enterprise architects made during this decade? What will we be proud of accomplishing?
Well, we hopefully we might be proud of saying, okay, it finally got accepted and it became a standard role in all kind of enterprises, right? And I think also we say, okay, it's not the SAP versus the non-SAP architects, right? Because I had that I might even say this in Gillette, or maybe not in Gillette, but at least in Procter & Gamble, there had been fights of the non-SAP architects and the SAP architects. And if that fight is going away because there's a common understanding on what is needed, etc., and it's more kind of a built-in practice, then it's fine. And I would even argue those companies who do not have an explicit enterprise architecture team, they might accept still the best practices on what we name enterprise architecture, but they might do these decision-taking implicit in their IT practice. Name them change manager, or you have now some consultancy says chief transformation officer, right? So if transformation is so important that we have now chief transformation officer, maybe they also act as enterprise architects. So I would be proud if in 2030 we look back and say, hey, some of the discussions are still valid and on what we had talked today.
This has been absolutely fascinating, Peter. Thanks for sharing your insight and for taking the time to walk us through both current and future state of enterprise architecture. I also want to call out the book you have written, right? If somebody wants to basically read your book or know a little more, where would they go? And please share a little more about insights about what is your book is all about.
First of all, it's not only my book. I wrote it with Anouk Das and Johannes Reichel. So those are my two
Yes, you did.
co-authors. Okay, big credit to them as well. So I think we look at all the different angles. So when we talk, for example, for the framework itself is described, but also the tooling side, the methodology side, how to build a practice. This is very core to my heart, right? So how to establish enterprise architecture. And we have certain use cases in the book, right? So use cases around mergers and acquisition, simplifications, moving to the cloud, etc. Some of these might get outdated in 5 years, so we might need to write in the second edition. But we have that combination of a little bit of the theory. We have this practical examples, use cases, typically, which we see in the SAP ecosystem. And then we have also something on Linux, the tooling, and the reference content, which is also a differentiator of this framework. So that, for me, was the motivation to write the book, because we didn't see any book of that kind. And where to get it? You can get it on Amazon easily. You can get it also with SAP Press. And we are a little bit proud that was the first book with SAP Press, which was printed in color, because we said, enterprise architecture, our diagrams are color, our books are black and white. No, then we don't want to write the book with you. Then I need to go back to the board and ask about that one. And yes, they finally got convinced that we have a first color book for the Suppress. The paper quality is not as thick and nice as the black and white one, but I think the color is an asset to the book as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. We'll make sure we'll add the links to the books. That way, if anybody wants to know more about what your super trio did, they would love to kind of see and learn it from there. Thank you,
The
Peter.
title is not that exciting, exotic. So it's enterprise architecture with SAP. So it's typical Suppress titles. It's something with SAP, right? Okay. But it's not all. So I hope also non-SAP guys will read it and buy it.
Read it through. That is awesome. Thank you so very much, Peter.
Thank you also for your good questions.